Hi everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. By hosting this online, we're hoping we'll be able to accommodate folks from all over the state that are interested in gleaning in their communities. If you have any questions, comments, or would like me to clarify anything during today's webinar, feel free to leave any of your questions or comments in the comments below, or send them to me directly. Should you like to reach out directly, you can find my contact information at the end of this video. With all that said, let's begin. Today's session is the fourth in a six-part webinar series we're calling our Master Gleaner Training. We put this together as a means of training people throughout the state on how Glean Kentucky's model works, with the hopes of making it more readily available to those interested in seeing gleaning happen in their communities. I'm hoping to have both longtime volunteer leaders as well as people completely new to gleaning in on this course, as a way for all of us to be on the same page and to learn from each other. This webinar takes a look at one of the most basic parts of what we do, reaching out to members of the communities to find volunteer gleaners, produce to glean, and groups who need it. If you're still pretty new to Glean Kentucky and haven't seen the first 3 webinars yet, I would definitely recommend going back to see them before viewing this webinar. They should provide a good foundation on how Glean Kentucky was founded, an in-depth look on how to get started gleaning with your local farmers market, as well as the basics of staying safe while gleaning. All 3 of those webinars should be linked in the description of this video and can be viewed at any time through our YouTube channel. So, like in our first 3 webinars, I think it's useful to view outreach through the lens of our 3-part model. All 3 major components of Glean Kentucky's model are necessary to consider when looking for partners, and without all 3 in place, the model simply doesn't work. Some of these elements are easier to come by than others, but without people in place at each of these roles, produce sources, gleaners, and produce recipients, gleaning will be difficult to sustain, if not impossible. Though I can recommend some specific ideas for finding participants for each element of Glean Kentucky's model, I think there are some basic ideas and strategies that can be used across the board. When you're just getting gleaning off the ground in your communities, these strategies may be the good ways to cast a wide net and to find partners of many types. Perhaps the most important thing to do when preparing for outreach about Glean Kentucky is to make sure you're familiar with the model, as well as your particular gleaning goals in your community. To brush up on the basics about gleaning, I'd recommend watching our first webinar. You can find a link to that in the description below. No matter where you speak or table about Glean Kentucky's work, it's important to collect information about the people interested in helping our work. Bringing a clipboard to collect names, emails, and phone numbers ensures you're able to follow up with people interested in being involved when the time comes. The most basic idea I can share here is that it helps to spread the word about Glean Kentucky in places with a broad variety of people. Public places where you may encounter people interested in Glean Kentucky's work for a variety of reasons. Because of this, one of my favorite places to spread the word about our work is at your local farmers market. Tabling at farmers markets are a great way to meet many farmers in one place and can provide a more natural way to explain your gleaning goals with them on a one-on-one basis. Beyond that, you're likely to encounter people who have an above-average interest in local food and agriculture, and who are already familiar and comfortable in attending the farmers market. These people can make great, easy fits as volunteer gleaners. It's also likely you may run into people working on hunger relief in your community at the farmers market. Nearly every time I've ever tabled at a farmers market, I've met at least 1 or 2 people who volunteer or who are on staff for a group in the community that does some sort of hunger relief. This just scratches the surface of how useful it can be to partner with your local farmers market when getting gleaning off the ground. For a more in-depth look at using this resource wisely, I'd recommend watching our second webinar, which goes into much greater detail about starting gleaning through your farmers market. You can find a link to that webinar in the description below. Two other places to find people to help with gleaning are at local communities of faith, as well as volunteer fairs held in your community. Faith communities of all types and denominations are a great way to meet many people with varying backgrounds from throughout the community, and they can also serve as a source of ready-made groups when you need many gleaners at once. When speaking to these groups, you're likely to meet people who farm or garden, or who know someone who does. You may also meet a staff person or a volunteer of a feeding organization you hadn't already connected with, or you may even find that the faith community you're speaking with already works closely with one. Volunteer fairs, on the other hand, are a great way to meet more than just volunteers. You're very likely to meet people who represent human service groups in your community, many of whom may be excited about the idea of receiving freshly gleaned produce. Keep a really good record of who you meet on these occasions and be sure that you're able to follow up with them later. Once you have a good foundation of people interested in your work, a great way to find even more supporters is to reach out to a member of the local media. Contacting a local newspaper, TV, or radio station can be a great way to share your gleaning plans with a much wider audience, and media outlets are generally excited to cover this sort of work. By taking the time to have a story or interview published like this, you might find the extra volunteers, produce donors, or agencies that you're looking for. For any help, questions, or advice about reaching out to members of the local media, feel free to contact the Glean, Kentucky main office. Though there are many ways of finding a good variety of gleaning, there are some strategies that lend themselves better toward finding one particular type of supporter, be it a volunteer gleaner, a source of produce, or a recipient agency. Following are a handful of suggestions to find specific partners to help fill in any gaps Glean, Kentucky's model you might have. Though any group may contain any type of supporter, there are some groups that are better targets when looking for volunteer gleaners. Student groups, clubs, and local businesses can be a great provider of ready-made groups to speak to when looking for volunteers. Many student groups and clubs require some service element to their membership, and some employers even pay for volunteer time for their employees. Gleaning is a great outlet for service or for paid volunteer time. Requesting a 5 or 10-minute window to speak to groups like this is easy and usually goes over really well with the people you'll be speaking to. Whether you're looking for big groups to glean an orchard or a farm, or you just want an individual gleaner here and there, you can tailor your message to what you're looking for and to what you think these groups are most likely to be able to provide. As I've mentioned many times, farmers markets are a great way to meet people with excess produce for you to glean. Making a good, personable impression on farmers at the market can go a really long way, whether they offer their excess produce right away or if they decide to donate further down the road. Your local cooperative extension office may also be a good place to get the lay of the land. Extension agents are usually very familiar with the growers in your county, and within reason, they may be able to help you connect with those they think might be the most interested in donating their excess. If they're unable to connect you to growers directly, they may at least allow you to speak to a group meeting or to leave flyers or handouts in their office. For other sources, it may be a case of approaching them on a one-on-one basis about gleaning from them, whether it's an in-person visit to a local grocery store or a phone call to a farmer in your area. A kind, personal explanation of what gleaning is may just be what it takes to win over a new produce donor to your efforts. At the end of the day, the reason for gleaning is not only to reduce food waste, but to get that produce to people who need it. If you're having trouble finding places to donate produce in your community, there are a couple of consistent resources throughout the state that might be able to help. Both the United Way and the Community Action Council have a presence in most counties throughout Kentucky, and generally have a great understanding of the work being done by human service organizations in your community. A quick meeting with someone from either of these groups may help you familiarize yourself with the agencies that could benefit from your donations. Schools in your community may also be a good outlet for fresh produce, particularly easy-to-eat fruits like apples, pears, and bananas. Family resource coordinators may help serve the schools throughout your area, and they may be interested in incorporating fresh produce into their existing backpack or summer feeding programs. Like with produce sources, a personal, one-on-one meeting or call with a potential produce recipient can go a really long way. It will allow you to explain what you have to offer, and it'll give you an opportunity to understand the specific needs of any potential recipients you might run into. Though each of these components, source, gleaner, and recipient, are all vital to the success of Glean Kentucky's model, they aren't each as easy to come by. It's important to have interested volunteers in place first, before making any commitments to glean from someone in your area. This ensures that when you find a good source of donated produce, you're able to respond within a reasonable amount of time. And as I've mentioned several times, tabling at farmers markets can be a great route to take for this. They allow you a regular way to meet new volunteers, while also making farmers more familiar and comfortable with gleaning. Finding recipients is generally the quickest part of building your gleaning network, but it's still vital to establish these relationships before your first glean. Most agencies are excited to receive fresh produce as long as they know that it's coming. Surprising a group by showing up with hundreds of pounds of produce to donate can often be burdensome to them when they haven't had the time ahead to plan for it. Finally, it's important to be in regular communication with your contacts, especially your gleaners. Even if you don't have something for them to do from the very beginning, a brief email checking in with them can go a long way in keeping their interest in what you're doing. Ultimately, the more people you have involved in gleaning, the more sustainable the work will become. Clear, concise communication is vital to this, and we'll be talking all about communication tools and the methods for using it in next month's webinar. That wraps up today's topic, all about making connections with gleaners, sources of produce, and recipient groups. On the next webinar, to be posted on August 26th, I'll be talking more about all the tools and strategies we have at our disposal when communicating with our network of supporters. Should you have any questions about the material I've covered today, don't hesitate to reach out to me and ask. I've left my contact information on the screen here if there's anything you'd like to speak with me about in more depth. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for this webinar, and I look forward to having you in for our next one.